The road into Grindle Moss twisted like something alive, wet, narrow, and obscured in 1,000 shades of green. Trees sagged toward the shoulder as though eavesdropping on passing vehicles, though none had passed in nearly 40 minutes. You could drive through that forest for hours and not see a single house, not a mailbox or a parked car, or even the remains of one. The forest reclaimed things fast here. Tire tracks faded after a single rain. Sound seemed to sink before they could echo. Eleanor kept both hands on the wheel, eyes half-lidded, mind somewhere between fatigue and trance. It was late, but she couldn't remember when she'd started driving. Her phone had died hours ago. She hadn't brought a charger. There had been no signal since the last gas station. Just an elderly man with yellow fingers who refused to make eye contact. She'd asked about the town of Grindle Moss, but he'd muttered something about bad ground and vanished into the storage shed out back. Still, she'd come anyway. It had been her grandmother's house once, nestled in the outskirts of this moss-ridden nowhere. And when the final papers came, she learned the property had passed to her. No ceremony, no letter, just a deed signed in faded ink and a cryptic note written in her grandmother's scratchy cursive. Don't go into the east woods after dusk. The soil remembers. That had stuck with her. It repeated in her head now, more rhythm than meaning. Her foot hovered over the brake as fog pressed into the gaps in the trees. The car's headlights flickered, once, then steadied. The radio gave a softest of static, then fell silent again. No music had played since she'd entered the forest. It had only been static since the edge of town, but she'd left it on for company. Even noise that meant nothing was better than the feeling that something was listening. Eleanor squinted through the windshield. She saw something up ahead, a narrow, rusting gate barely tall enough to mark an entrance. No fence accompanied it, just the gate itself, crookedly attached to a rotting post. It hung open, swinging ever so slightly in wind. Beyond it, the road narrowed further, transformed into a gravel path half swallowed by weeds. A worn wooden sign hung on the post. Chalk Hollow. Her grandmother had called it a quiet place. She turned onto the path and felt gravel crunch beneath her tires. The trees thickened. Low branches grazed the roof like fingernails across sheet metal. Ferns swelled in the ground, tall and feathery, brushing at her windows. There was something uncanny about the way they moved, not with the wind, but with some separate rhythm, like underwater floor responding to distant tremors. The house came into view without warning. It rose in the fog like a memory, tall, gabled, flaking paint. Windows so grimy they barely reflected light. The chimney leaned slightly to one side, and the porch steps sagged in the middle like a weary sigh. Something about it was immediately wrong. Not grotesque, not haunted, just quiet in a way nothing else was. The birds stopped chirping. The wind died. Even the rustle of leaves vanished. Eleanor parked and stepped out. Her boots landed in soft earth. The smell of damp wood and iron filled her nose. She paused, one hand on the car door, and listened. Nothing. Her key fit the front lock. It turned with a reluctant click, like something being woken from sleep. The door groaned open, and the scent of musk and ancient dust spilled out, thicker than she remembered. Inside, the house was darker than it should have been. Her grandmother had kept lace curtains in the front parlor and wide, open windows that used to let in the early morning sun. Now, the windows seemed smaller, or maybe just dirtier. Furniture sat exactly where it always had, covered in white sheets like ghosts pretending to rest. Her fingers brushed one, and a fine layer of dust stirred and hovered midair. She didn't turn on the lights. She wasn't sure they worked. Instead, she lit one of the old glass oil lamps from the hallway shelf, surprised to find it still held fuel. The flame shimmered low and golden, casting shadows that reached across the wooden floor like long, beckoning fingers. The house creaked softly, but otherwise did not object to her presence. Eleanor took off her coat, folded it across the banister, and listened again. Still, no birds, no wind, only the faintest sound, almost like breathing, but from beneath the floorboards. She pressed her palm flat to the ground. It was only her imagination, she told herself. Houses settled, old beamside, pipes released air, but the warmth under her hand felt strange, as though the floor itself were holding a breath. She left her suitcase by the door and wandered deeper into the house, oil lamp in hand. The kitchen was just as she remembered it. Green cupboards, chipped enamel sink, the smell of dried thyme and linseed oil. A pair of dried herbs hung over the window, turned brittle with time. Her grandmother had always said they were for luck. The basement door stood slightly ajar. It never used to. Eleanor stopped in front of it. The darkness beyond was thick, almost tar-like. She held the lamp a bit higher. Its flame danced, but didn't reach the bottom of the stairs. There was a strange smell wafting up, wet earth and something faintly metallic, like coins soaking in water. She closed the door quietly and bolted it from the outside. Upstairs, the bedrooms were coated in dust and shadows. The master bedroom remained untouched. A thin lace curtain above the bed, a single rocking chair near the window, and a photograph of her grandfather turned face down on the nightstand. She picked it up slowly. The glass had cracked across his eyes. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and let the house breathe around her. She didn't move for a long time. The light from her lamp cast gentle waves of motion against the ceiling, hypnotic and warm. Her eyelids grew heavier. Outside, something moved between the ferns. She didn't see it, but the house did. Eleanor woke to the sound of dripping, not a steady drip, an irregular one, as if something had been dislodged, knocked loose from whatever position it had held for years. It came from somewhere below the floorboards. She sat up slowly. The room was dim, the oil lamp's flame reduced to a dull ember, flickering with its last breath. Morning hadn't arrived yet. There was no light outside the window, no hint of blue or gray, just black, a deep, total kind of black, like the woods had swallowed the dawn whole. She rubbed her eyes and listened. The dripping had stopped. The house creaked again, different this time. Not the sharp cracks that would adjust in the temperature, but a long, low sound, like breath passing through the ribs of something ancient. Then silence. Even her own breath felt like it didn't belong. She reached for the lamp and turned the wick gently. The flame rose, warm and orange, and spilled light across the lace curtains. Her boot still sat by the door. Her coat still hung on the banister outside. The floor felt cold beneath her socks. Not icy, just indifferent. She walked carefully down the stairs, each step releasing a soft whine from the wood, as though the house resented being disturbed. The light played along the walls, revealing picture frames covered in dust, floral wallpaper faded into the color of old bones, and a grandfather clock that had not moved in years. The bolted basement door looked unchanged, still firmly latched. The scent of dampness was stronger now, though she avoided going near it. She drifted toward the hallway at the back of the house. It led to what used to be the guest rooms. Her grandmother had once boarded travelers during the rainy season. Pilgrims, she used to call them, though Eleanor never understood why they came or what they sought. That part of the house had always been cooler. Older, somehow, the door to the last room on the right was open. She hesitated. She didn't remember leaving it open. The lamp trembled slightly in her hand, not from her grip. The flame itself bent inward, as if reacting to some unseen draft pulling toward the open door. Eleanor took a cautious step forward, then another, and the soft rug beneath her feet muted the creaks of the floorboards. The room beyond was still. The smell changed when she crossed the threshold, not foul, but sterile, cold and sharp. The scent of stone washed with rainwater. And there, in a shaft of soft golden light from the oil lamp, she saw something that made her freeze. There was no dust. The bed, the desk, the windowsill, even the edges of the cracked floor tiles, all clean, not polished, not fresh, but untouched, as though nothing had aged in this space. The air felt heavy and still, like a room sealed tight for too long. There were papers on the desk, arranged in a perfect fan. Eleanor's throat tightened. She hadn't put them there. She moved toward the desk, each step slow, deliberate. The lamp cast her shadow across the pale wooden surface, elongating her hand as she reached for the topmost page. It was yellowed slightly with age, but the ink was clear. The first word stopped her heart for a moment. Eleanor. She leaned in. It wasn't a letter. Not exactly. Just a line of handwriting, in her grandmother's looping, crooked style. The house does not forget. It only waits. Her fingers curled around the paper, the edges dry and delicate as old leaves. She looked at the second sheet beneath it. Keep the door shut during the mist. It feeds best when seen. She stepped back from the desk. The lamp flame flickered violently. A sudden creak echoed from the hallway behind her. She spun around. Nothing. Just the same dim hallway. Her footsteps in the rug, and the slow, deep silence of the house waiting for her to make a sound. She stepped out of the room, closed the door. The knob felt warm beneath her fingers. She returned to the kitchen, now feeling impossibly far from where she had just stood, as though the hallways had stretched behind her. She opened the cupboard and found a tin of tea her grandmother had kept. A label faded into a soft gray, the scent of dry leaves still sharp and bitter. The kettle was where it had always been, old and blackened from years of fire. The stove didn't work, of course. The house wasn't connected to anything anymore, but there was an old iron brazier near the hearth, left over from the days before electric heat. She found matches in the drawer, struck one, lit a fire with crumpled newspaper, and split logs from the stack near the back door. She boiled water in silence. The fire cracked and hissed as it grew, steam rising gently from the kettle, the soft whistle more comforting than anything she felt since arriving. She made her tea, took it back to the front parlor, and sat in the armchair across from the curtained windows. The fog outside had thickened. Now it pressed against the glass like a living thing, heavy and pale, pulsing almost imperceptibly. She sipped the tea. The warmth helped. Her hands stopped shaking. She closed her eyes, and then she heard it again. The drip, this time closer. Above her, Eleanor looked up slowly. The ceiling was water-stained, its center bowed slightly inward, as though sagging under a hidden weight. But that wasn't what disturbed her most. What disturbed her was the sound beneath the drip, the faintest murmur of voices, whispering, no word she could understand, just the rhythm of something speaking. She stood, clutching the lamp, and backed away from the spot beneath the ceiling. The parlor was darker now, as though the light from the fire and the lamp had lost their courage. And outside, the fog curled tighter around the house, thicker now, blotting out the trees. One voice rose a little louder, still muffled, still beyond recognition, but urgent, calling her name. Eleanor. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor, and from the ceiling, a single droplet of black water fell. The droplet struck the parlor floor with a sound louder than it should have made, sharper, as though it fell from impossible height. Eleanor stepped back instinctively, her lamp swinging at her side. The shattered teacup pieces lay strewn like small white teeth in the dust, but it was a droplet that held her gaze. It hadn't spread. It sat perfectly round on the floorboards, slick and dark like oil. Another drop fell beside it, and another. Eleanor looked up. There was no water pipe above the parlor. She remembered the house's layout well enough to know that. The attic stretched across the upper floor, unfinished, filled with old boxes and insulation, no plumbing at all. And yet, the stain on the ceiling above her pulsed, as if something behind it was breathing. The lamp flamed thin. She turned away before it could gut her out. The house did not want her in the parlor anymore. She obeyed, back in the hall. The walls seemed narrower than they had earlier that morning. Maybe it was the shadows. Maybe it was the fog outside, sucking what little light remained from the windows. The pictures on the wall had shifted slightly in their frames. She was almost certain of it. The photograph of her grandmother, one smiling faintly in her apron near the garden, now appeared to be turned just a few degrees, her expression less readable. The eyes no longer met hers. Eleanor ascended the stairs slowly. Each step announced itself. The upper landing opened onto a long corridor that stretched the length of the house. At the far end, a small door stood ajar, a linen closet, or at least that's what she remembered it being. But memory was unreliable in this place. The air smelled like old paper and dried out herbs, brittle and sour. Her bedroom was to the left. The door was closed. She hadn't closed it. She stopped with her hand on the knob, listening. Her ears strained, heart loud in her throat. For a moment, she heard nothing but the creak of her own weight on the floorboards. and then a soft sound from behind the door. A rustling, like something shifting against cloth. She pushed the door open. The bed was made. She had not made the bed. The sheet was smooth flat, corners tucked with precision she didn't remember learning. Her bag sat at the foot of the mattress. The lamp she left inside still burned, but the flame was a little smaller than before. She stepped in cautiously. The smell in the room had changed. It no longer smelled like dust or thyme. Now it smelled like earth, damp, mossy earth, like the forest in early spring. It reminded her of burying dead things in the garden as a child. Small birds, insects, once even a kitten the neighbor's dog had mauled. Her grandmother had shown her how to dig the grave shallow but neat. Everything returns to the ground. Eventually, she had whispered. Eleanor moved the mirror on the dresser. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she just wanted to see her own face. A reassurance that she was still here, still herself. The mirror was old, silver-backed, slightly warped, the kind that blurred details around the edges. Her reflection appeared pale, her hair tousled from sleep, her eyes dark with exhaustion. And just behind her, something moved. A shape, not a person, not anything she could name. It was tall, wrong, blurred like a water-stained memory. She spun around. The room was empty. The lamp flickered once, twice, then flared back into life. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She clutched the edge of the dresser and steadied herself, her breath ragged. Nothing there. No movement. No sound. But in the mirror, she turned back. The shape was gone, but the reflection wasn't quite right. The angle was wrong. The way the lamp's flame bent the glass, the tilt of the ceiling above her, the lines of the door behind. Everything was just slightly off, like a dream remembered through fog. She touched the glass. Cold, colder than it should have been. Her fingertip left no mark on the surface. No smudge. No warmth. She stepped away quickly, heart still pounding. The whispering returned. Not above her now. Behind the walls. Beneath the floor. Murmurs threading through the bones of the house. Low and rhythmic, like chanting without words. It rose, fell, rose again, like waves breaking gently on a shore too far to see. She left the bedroom. She needed to breathe. The attic, for a reason she didn't quite understand, felt like the safest place in that moment. It was high, distant, and it had only ever been full of things. Old trunks, yellowed books, jars of buttons, and rusted tools. Nothing alive. Nothing that breathed. She pulled down the cord of the attic door, and the ladder creaked into place. The air that spilled from above was cooler, drier, not fresh, exactly, but less heavy. She climbed. The attic smelled of cedar and forgotten winters. Dust motes swirled in the lamplight, catching on strands of old spiderwebs. A broken rocking horse sat in the corner. A chest with brass latches rested beneath the eaves. The roof's wooden ribs arched above like the inside of a whale. She stepped carefully across the creaking boards and sat beside the old chest. Her grandmother's handwriting was scratched faintly into the lid in chalk. Lanterns. For the heavy nights. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she set the lamp down and pulled a small window open just enough to let in the outside air. The fog was thicker than ever. She could see nothing past the roofline. No trees. No ground, just that pale, suffocating swirl. And then movement. Something shifted within the fog. Not close, but not far either. A slow, gliding form, as if something enormous drifted just beyond the veil. It didn't look up, but she had the distinct feeling it knew she was watching. She closed the window softly, and from somewhere inside the attic, farther back, beyond the visible edges of the lamplight, a sound. A low scraping, like something being dragged across the floor. She did not move. She did not breathe. The whispering returned, and the lamp began to dim. The lamp dimmed until its flame hovered like a breath on glass. Small, delicate, barely alive. Eleanor didn't move. The sound at the far end of the attic continued. A slow drag, pause, drag. Not hurried, not urgent, deliberate, a knowing sound. The sound of something that had waited long enough. She sat frozen beside the chest, her fingers gripping the wood until her knuckles turned white. The scraping stopped. Silence filled the space, thick as the dust that hung in the air. Eleanor dared to glance toward the dark beyond the lamplight. The attic didn't end at the far wall. She could see now that it extended farther back than she remembered, as if the house had grown while she wasn't watching. The beam stretched into a dark that swallowed even the faint reach of her oil lamp. She reached for the chest. Her grandmother had written on it, "Lanterns for the heavy nights." Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. It opened with a soft creak, and the scent of old metal and beeswax drifted up to meet her. Inside were 5 lanterns, round, glass-sided, trimmed in bronze, not electric. Each one held a squat candle, the kind that burned slow and steady, meant to last a night. Beneath them, carefully folded, was a cloth of some kind, dark blue, embroidered with small, looping symbols she didn't recognize. She reached in, took one of the lanterns, and set it on the attic floor beside the dying lamp. The candle inside the lantern flickered. Then, without her touching it, it caught flame. The wick glowed bright and warm, and the light pushed against the edges of the attic's gloom. Not far, just enough, like the lantern knew what she needed. Behind her, something exhaled. She didn't turn. She couldn't. Her body locked itself still, as if movement might provoke whatever lingered in the dark. Then the attic floor creaked. Not from her. One step, then another. The wood moaned with each movement. Too slow to be a rat, too heavy to be wind. Eleanor snatched the remaining 4 lanterns from the chest. Her arms trembled beneath their weight, but she dared not leave them behind. The lantern that had lit itself she held in her teeth by the handle. She didn't look back, not even once. She backed her way across the attic floor, boots landing on each board with painful clarity. The ladder still hung from the opening in the ceiling. The hallway below looked impossibly far away. The breath came again, closer this time. Not a gust, but a slow, damp sigh, as though something enormous had leaned forward in the dark. She descended the ladder fast, the metal cold against her palms. One of the lanterns slipped, clattering down the last 2 rungs and landing hard, but didn't go out. It rolled to stop beside her boots, flame steady as a heartbeat. She didn't stop. She carried them all to her bedroom, placed them around the edges. On the floor, the dresser, the window ledge. She lit each candle with the first. One by one, their warm light pushed back the strange cold, drawing a perimeter in flame. The whispering receded, not vanished, but dulled, like voices muttering behind a door. She sat in the center of the room, breathing heavily, fingers stained with old wax. The mirror still sat on the dresser, and though she wasn't looking into it, she felt it looking back. She picked up her grandmother's notebook from where it had rested beside the bed. A simple thing, brown leather cover, pages brittle with age. She hadn't opened it before. Now she did. Inside were lists, salt at the doors, iron under the bed, never light the 3rd window, burn rosemary when the mist turns gray, sleep inside the circle, never beside it. She flipped the page. There, written with a shaking hand. They walk where the ferns bend, the ones who forgot their names. If you hear your voice outside the window, do not answer. You are not home. You are not even awake. The wind shifted outside. She could hear it now, howling softly against the eaves, the fog thinning just enough for it to move. The whispering grew louder again, more distinct. The sound of words without language, syllables that made her stomach clench. She checked the windows. All closed, the curtains drawn. The lamp on the dresser flickered. And the mirror, something was in the mirror. Not a shape this time, not a figure, a scene. The attic, as it had been moments before. But she was not in it. Instead, the attic was empty, except for something crouched at the far end, facing the wall. A long, gray form, like a man carved from melted wax. Its limbs were too long, its spine arched too far. It sat hunched like a question mark. Then slowly it turned, not in the attic. In the mirror, its face was nothing, just a smooth sheet of pale flesh, like wax smeared over bone. And yet it looked straight at her. She stumbled back. The lanterns flared. The mirror darkened to nothing. She slammed her palm against the dresser, flipping the mirror face down, the silver glass thudding against the wood. The whispering stopped. The wind ceased, and in the sudden silence, Eleanor realized something had changed in the room. The space near the bed felt wrong. She turned slowly, lantern in hand. The bed sheets were disturbed, indented, shifted, as though someone had just risen from them. But she had not left the room, and the door had never opened. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor in the center of her bedroom, the lanterns burning around her in a rough circle. They hummed faintly, no sound, not really, but an awareness, like the candles knew they were working, keeping something out, or maybe keeping her in. She watched the bed. The shallow dip in the mattress hadn't faded, not even after hours. It didn't spring back like fabric should. Instead, the shape settled deeper, as though whatever had left it still lingered, invisibly pressing down. She opened her grandmother's notebook again. The next page was covered in what looked like map sketches, jagged outlines of forest paths, the backfields, an odd spiral labeled only the sunk ring. Lines of notes ran beside it in a cramped hand. Ferns only bend inward. Moss grows in a circle where the ground is hollow. Walkers don't breathe unless you do. Do not follow music. Do not answer your name after nightfall. She traced the spiral with her finger and felt a faint vibration beneath the paper. Not movement, more like tension, as if the page didn't want to be read. She turned the notebook face down and stood. The lanterns had burned steadily for hours, but one, the smallest, the one she had set on the windowsill, was guttering. The fog outside hadn't lifted. It clung to the glass in thin threads, almost like veins. Beyond it, the outline of the forest waited unchanged. The house felt different this morning, less passive, like it had finally noticed her again. The floorboards sighed when she stepped on them. The air was thicker, scented now with something richer than earth, something sweet, too sweet. She pulled on her coat and boots, gathered her bag, stuffed the notebook into it, and left the bedroom. She paused at the top of the stairs. The house listened. She could feel it, not just in the creaks of the walls, but in the way silence fell behind her, wrapping each step she took in hush. The parlor was cold. The teacup shards had been swept into a neat pile beside the fireplace. She hadn't done it. She didn't ask who had. Outside, the fog met her at the threshold like an old friend. She stepped off the porch and onto gravel path, her boots crunching too loud in the morning stillness. Every step forward felt like crossing into deeper water. The trees beyond the gate stood motionless, their branches heavy with dew. The ferns at their base grew tall, far taller than she remembered, some nearly to her shoulders, thick with soft fronds that curled inward as she passed. The forest breathed. She realized it after only a few paces in. Not metaphorically. It breathed. The canopy shifted like a chest rising and falling. The moss shimmered slightly, like skin reacting to touch. And the air, it was moving but not with wind. It contracted, then released, slow and steady, as if something enormous slept just beneath the soil. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay in the house any longer. The notebook crackled in her bag. She took it out and flipped until she found the map again. A small X marked a point to the east of the property, beyond the second ravine. Next to it, a note in red pencil. If you must see it, go in the morning. The ground doesn't feed in daylight. She hoped that was still true. She followed the trail deeper, past the old wooden fence that had long since rotted into moss-covered ribs. The fog grew thinner as she moved, not thicker. Strangely enough, the deeper into the woods she went, the clearer the air became. Sound returned. A bird call here, the rustle of something small through the underbrush, but the ferns still bent as she passed, always toward the center, always inward, as though everything was leaning to see her. She passed a stone ring, half buried, covered in pale lichen. It stood no taller than her knee, broken in places, but still faintly circular. Inside the ring, the moss had turned black. She didn't step in. The trail forked, left toward the ravine, right toward what looked like more the same. Her hand hovered over the map. The X lay just beyond the left path. She turned left. The air changed again. No longer sweet. Now it smelled like iron and crushed leaves, and something deeper, wet stone maybe. Her boots squelched into damp soil. The trees grew thicker. The light dimmed, though the sun hadn't shifted. Shadows grew longer in places they shouldn't. And then she heard it. Music. Faint, barely a whisper. Just a few soft notes. Stringed, maybe a violin. A lullaby she half remembered, but couldn't place. It came from ahead, just beyond the next bend. The notebook had warned her, do not follow music. She stopped. The sound grew louder. She turned to leave, but behind her, the path had changed. Where there had been two forks, now there were none. Only the one trail, stretching forward, leading deeper into the trees. The music continued, and behind it, her voice, calling softly, "Eleanor." She clutched the notebook to her chest and whispered under her breath, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But the ferns all turned, all of them, and everyone bent toward her, toward the sound. And the voice, her own voice, whispered again, "Come home." The voice, the one that used hers, sounded nearer now, too near. It didn't echo the way voices should in the forest. It slipped through the trees like smoke, curling between the ferns, always from behind her, no matter how many times she turned. She ran. The ferns parted without resistance. Their soft fronds brushed her arms like damp fingers. The forest had no path now, only vague suggestions, a rhythm in the trees, a beckoning lean in the branches. The farther she moved from the sound, the louder it grew. That broken violin lullaby woven again, dissonant now, wrong in its tune. A child's song dragged across rusted strings. Still, she didn't stop. Something was walking behind her, not running, not chasing, walking, deliberate, heavy, like it had all the time in the world. And that was the worst part, the confidence of it. Whatever it was, it didn't need to rush. The trees thinned ahead, a sudden opening unnatural in shape, a perfect oval cut into the forest. Through it, Eleanor saw pale grass and a single stone, flat and wide, with a symbol carved deep into its center, spirals around a hollow circle. The X on the map. She stepped into the clearing. The air stopped moving. Dead still. She crossed the grass to the stone, her breath ragged, hands trembling from a sprint. Her heart pounded in her ears, and yet the quiet around her made it seem too loud, like it might give her away. The stone was low to the ground, maybe 2 feet tall and 3 across. The spiral cut into it was deep, deeper than she thought stone could be carved by hand. Her fingers traced it instinctively, and the moment she touched the symbol, the music stopped. So did the voice. Everything held its breath. The trees around the clearing leaned outward now, as if recoiling. Even the ferns bent away, no longer trying to pull her in. The spiral pulsed under her palm, not in heat or light, but a soft pressure, like something was aware of her from beneath. She crouched beside it, opened the notebook again. On the map page, new writing had appeared. Faint, scratched in ink she didn't remember. The hollow must not break. She looked back at the stone. It wasn't just a marker, it was a seal. The ground around it had begun to change. Grass browning, soil shrinking into itself, pulling downward. A slow circle of depression spreading from the stone outward, as if something beneath the surface had started to inhale. She stumbled back. Behind her, branches snapped. A long shadow stretched across the far side of the clearing. She turned, and it stood at the tree lean. Tall, unmoving, shaped like a man, but not. Its arms were too long. Its skin the color of river silt. Head slightly tilted, like a bird studying something strange. It had no face. Just smooth, blank skin stretched tight across the front of its skull, as if features had been removed rather than never formed. Yet it saw her. She knew it saw her. Its chest rose and fell, slowly, breathing in time with the ground, connected to whatever waited beneath the seal. Eleanor didn't speak. She didn't run. She backed away slowly. The notebook pressed to her chest, every muscle in her body locked with terror. The creature didn't follow. It only raised one long hand, palm out, and pointed at the stone, not threatening, not beckoning, just pointing. She turned to the stone again. It had cracked. A thin black line ran across the spiral now, weeping something dark, not liquid, not blood, something slower, thicker, as if the rock was leaking memory. The forest groaned around her, the trees pulling tighter, their trunks creaking inward like ribs. She looked down at the notebook. Another new sentence had appeared on the last page. If it opens, the house won't keep you. Nothing will. The lanterns, her grandmother's circle, the rules. They had never been about protecting her from ghosts or demons. They were about this, keeping this buried. Eleanor fell to her knees beside the stone. Her breath came in shudders, her eyes stinging with panic. What was she supposed to do? She didn't know the ritual. She didn't know how to close whatever had been started. The faceless thing stepped into the clearing. Its legs bent the wrong way. Its gait was slow, steady, like a puppet moved by strings underwater. But it didn't lunge, didn't threaten. It just walked, pausing now and then to listen to the soil beneath its feet. It moved around her in a wide circle, never coming closer than 10 feet, always watching. She reached into her bag, pulling the cloth from the lantern chest, the one with the stitched symbols. She didn't know what they meant. She didn't care. She unfolded it and laid it over the stone, pressing down as if her palms alone could seal the crack. The spiral throbbed once under fabric, then went still. The black line stopped leaking. The earth held its breath. The thing in the clearing stopped moving. She didn't dare look up, didn't dare move. And slowly, the forest exhaled. The ferns bent again, this time outward. The trees seemed to relax. The pressure in the air lifted like a storm turning in another direction. When she finally raised her head, the thing was gone. The clearing was empty. No shadow, no footfalls, just a circle of brown grass and a sealed stone wrapped in forgotten symbols. She stood, and behind her, on the far edge of the trees, another sound, a different voice, hoarse, familiar. Eleanor? She turned, and there, just past the trees, stood her mother, dressed in her old raincoat, soaked from head to toe, mud on her knees, eyes wide, smiling. "Sweetheart," the woman said, holding out her arms. "Come home." Eleanor didn't move, because her mother had died 13 years ago, and her feet weren't touching the ground. The figure of her mother stood perfectly still, half obscured by hanging moss and crooked pine branches, framed in the drifting fog like something sculpted from memory. Eleanor's first instinct, so primal, so immediate, was to run to her, to believe, but the raincoat was wrong. It was the same blue coat her mother used to wear in early spring, with a torn cuff and faded buttons. But the color was wrong, too vibrant, unwashed by time, preserved, as though the coat remembered more than the woman inside it. And those feet, those pale bare feet, hovered inches above the earth. To look at them was like staring too long at an unfinished painting. The brain tried to correct the mistake, but it never looked quite right. "Eleanor," the woman said again, "quieter now. It's cold. You're tired." The voice held a rhythm that was familiar, but it didn't feel like her mother's. It echoed too long after it ended. It spoke in perfect cadence. Too perfect, like a recording of love. Eleanor stepped back from the edge of the clearing, her breath fogging in the cold. She didn't answer, didn't blink. "You've been alone too long," the thing said. "Come out of the woods now. Come with me. We've missed you." "We," Eleanor whispered before she meant to speak. The figure smiled wider. Eleanor turned and ran. She plunged through the trees, taking any path that bent away from the thing in the coat, letting instinct override direction. The woods no longer felt real. Paths curled back toward themselves, trees leaned into her, and roots shifted just before her feet could land. It didn't matter. She had to move. Behind her, she could still hear it calling, but it wasn't her mother anymore. The voice fractured, slid up an octave, then two, then dropped into something deeper than breath. It repeated her name like a hymn, dragging syllables across the soil. Eleanor. The notebook burned against her ribs, as if trying to warn her of something else. Another presence. Another sound. Something was keeping pace. She reached a ridge she didn't recognize and clambered up, slipping on the wet moss. Her hands dug into soft loam and old roots, her fingers catching on stone and damp bark. She crested the rise just as the light shifted. Light? There hadn't been sunlight in days. Or at least, it didn't feel like it. And yet, over the ridge, something glowed faintly gold, like a lantern held just beneath the earth. She followed the glow, panting, heart thrashing in her chest. It led her to a hollow, bowl-shaped, sunken in the center, rimmed with low-standing stones and thick ferns all bending toward the middle. She stood at the edge, staring down. At the bottom of the depression stood a house. Not her house, but a mirror of it, older, smaller, built from darker wood, half sunken into ground. No windows, just a door, slightly ajar, with symbols carved into the frame. Around the base of the foundation, ferns pressed upward like reaching hands. The lantern light came from inside. It pulsed, like a heartbeat, like the house was waiting. Eleanor didn't descend. She knelt beside the rim of the hollow, heart hammering. Every part of her screaming, not this, not here, not yet. She opened the notebook again. A new page. This one wasn't her grandmother's handwriting. It was her own, written in her style, her slant, her pressure. But she had never written this. It read, "If you find the other house, do not go inside. That is not where you end." She snapped the book shut. Inside the house, something moved. The light flickered once, then stilled. The door creaked a little wider. A figure stepped into the threshold. It was her, Eleanor, but not. This version of her wore no coat, no boots. Her skin was the same, but subtly off. Too smooth, too pale, as if made from wax poured into a familiar mold. Her eyes gleamed like lantern flame, and her smile didn't know how to stop. The other Eleanor tilted her head, then raised a hand, and pointed, up the hill, right at her. Eleanor staggered back. The ferns around her feet tightened. They gripped her ankles, gently, but undeniably, not painful, just insistent. She tore away, scrambling backwards. The mirror house below seemed to pulse in disapproval. The other Eleanor took one step forward. Crossing the threshold, the door didn't creak. The floor didn't groan. She moved without touching, as if she walked just above the wood. The rail Eleanor turned and fled again, back through the woods, past shapes and symbols she'd passed before, but now in reverse. Trees twisted differently. The stone rings cracked as she passed, their patterns breaking, warping. She didn't stop until the Real house came into view. Tall, aging, imperfect, but real. The porch steps sighed beneath her weight. The front door opened without her touching it. Inside, the lanterns were still lit, still burning. She slammed the door behind her and collapsed to her knees, panting, heart scraping her ribs from inside. The notebook spilled from her bag and landed open. More handwriting, more messages. This one read, "Close the mirror, salt the frame, burn the photo." She looked toward the stairs, up to her room, where the mirror waited. The mirror had been covered. She remembered flipping it face down on the dresser that first night. But as Eleanor reached the top of the stairs, the door to her room was already ajar, and she could see the edge of the glass, upright, uncovered, as if it had turned itself to face the door. The lanterns in the hallway still burned, steady, golden, unwavering, but they didn't seem to reach inside the bedroom. Their light faded just at the threshold, like something inside the room had swallowed a whole. She took a step forward. The floor groaned beneath her, not loudly, but enough to let the room know she was there. Eleanor paused at the doorway and looked inside. The room was still, too still. The mirror stood on the dresser, clean, bright, almost gleaming. Her reflection stared back, exactly where she was, same clothes, same posture, but her reflection was blinking too slowly. Eleanor blinked once. The reflection didn't follow, and then it smiled, not with her lips, with its own, a slow, wide grin that tugged too far at the cheeks, too long at the corners. Not cruel, just certain, like it knew something she hadn't yet remembered. Eleanor backed away from the door. The lanterns flickered once in warning. She turned and hurried downstairs, each step jarring her knees, the house groaning with every movement. The living room was dim, the fireplace cold. Her breath fogged slightly, and her boots left faint prints across the wooden floor, dark prints wet the edges. She hadn't stepped in anything. Not yet. She found the salt in the pantry. A thick sack of it, coarse and unrefined. The kind her grandmother used to throw in handfuls over the front steps each winter, not for ice, but for the watching things. She hadn't understood the phrasing then. She did now. Eleanor carried the sack upstairs, her fingers numbing around its weight. She didn't look into the mirror as she re-entered the room. She could feel it try and pull her gaze, like a string tugging from just above her eyebrows. Instead, she poured the salt in a circle around the frame. Not a perfect circle. The dresser wasn't wide enough, but she completed it in front, tracing symbols from a notebook into the grains with her finger. As she finished the last mark, the mirror's surface rippled, not cracked, not shook, rippled like water. Her reflection blinked again, slowly, and then spoke. Her voice, but deeper, worn down, like it had been echoing for years before it found her. You're not where you think you are. Eleanor didn't respond. She picked up the photo from the corner of the dresser, an old picture of her and her grandmother standing in front of the garden gate. A summer day, both smiling, both alive. The edges of the photo had curled from time. The image was slightly faded. But now, her grandmother's face had changed. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her mouth was open in the photo, stretched in a silent scream. Her eyes black. Eleanor dropped the photo to the floor and lit the corner with a match. The fire took immediately. The paper twisted, flared, and blackened, curling inward on itself with a faint hiss. As it burned, the mirror screamed. Not loud, but deep, a low, grinding noise that sounded like a voice caught in stone. The reflection darkened. The other Eleanor backed away, her movements now too fast, jittery, erratic like old film-skipping frames. Her face blurred, melted, reformed, then blurred again. The mirror shattered. A spiderweb of fractures splintered from the center outward, but no glass fell. The surface held. Cracked, behold. Eleanor stepped back, breathing hard. The salt circle held its shape, and slowly, the light in the room returned. She gathered the burned remains of the photo and swept them into a cloth. The notebook pulsed faintly in her bag, warm now. She took it out. A new page had appeared. No handwriting, just a drawing, a staircase, winding down, beneath the house. She didn't know of any basement. There was no door, but something in her bones knew. It was under the parlor, where the dripping had started, where the whispers had first been heard. The page shifted again, not visually, but in feel. Another line of writing now bled to the paper, as though ink had seeped up from underneath. If you go down, do not speak. Do not knock. Do not ask. She turned slowly toward the hall. The floor beneath her creaked differently now, lower, deeper, as though something had awakened under boards. The salt held the mirror, for now, but the house had opened a new mouth, and it waited below. The house had grown heavier. Eleanor could feel in the walls, in the ceiling, in the way the air sagged with weight, like she was walking through a place not designed for breath anymore. The mirror behind her still stood cracked but unmoving, held fast in the salt circle. It hadn't spoken again, but the silence it left behind was worse. It was expectant. Something else had taken up listening. She returned to the parlor, boots pressing carefully into the aged floorboards, eyes tracing the seams where wall met floor. The space beneath her hummed with stillness, not movement, not sound, just presence, like a mouth pressed against the door. Listening through the grain, she moved aside the armchair, the broken teacup long swept away by something unseen. The fireplace sat dormant, cold stones, ashes, no hearth light remained. And then she saw it, a seam in the wood just beneath the rug. not visible, felt. The rug had been moved back and forth so many times that its fibers had worn grooves into the floor. But here, in this one spot, the grain changed, shifted ever so slightly. Lines bent inwards, as if the wood remembered being opened. Eleanor knelt and pressed her fingers along the edge. The boards here were not nailed like the others. They lifted, resisted, but did not snap. She pulled gently. The trapdoor gave with a breath of stale air. Not damp, not rotten, just sealed. And below it, a stairwell curved downward into shadow. She lit one of the remaining lanterns, held it over the gap. Wooden stairs descended in a tight spiral. Far too many for the space the house should occupy. 20, 40, more. The notebook warned her. Do not speak. Do not knock. Do not ask. She slipped the notebook into her coat and began to descend. Each step creaked, but quietly, like the stairs remembered someone else's weight, and didn't want hers. The deeper she went, the warmer the air became. Not with heat, but with saturation. The walls sweated. The lantern's light distorted against damp wood. Then stone. About 30 steps in, the walls became cut stone, impossibly old, with no mortar between the blocks. They were smooth, worn, no markings, no seams. The silence grew thicker. She swallowed. Her ears rang from it. About halfway down, she passed a mirror, just hanging there, set into the stone wall like it had always belonged. Oval, gilded in black. She didn't look into it. She didn't stop. Down and down. The stairwell bent tighter, spiraling like a corkscrew to the gut of the earth. The air began to smell of iron and lichen. Her breath shortened. Her fingers cramped from holding the lantern. Then, suddenly, the stairs ended. The chamber below opened wide, a perfect circle carved in the stone, domed above, uneven beneath. Roots crisscrossed the ceiling like veins. Pools of dark water had collected in dips across the floor. The lantern flickered, unsure. At the center stood a table. Not wood, not stone, something between. It looked carved from ash that had hardened. Black, porous, strangely lightless. Around were 7 chairs, none of them matching. One metal, one wicker, one appeared to be bone. None were empty. Each held a figure. Still, lifeless. Each slumped in a different pose. Their faces were covered, some with fabric, some with masks made of bark or antlers or paper painted black. One wore a mirrored plate in place of face, cracked straight down the center. Eleanor did not speak. Her heartbeat echoed in her skull. She circled them slowly. Their hands were visible, each set resting on the table, arranged palms up, nails long, skin gray, wrinkled as parchment. Some wore rings, some had fingers missing, but all of them, every one, held something in their palm. A key, different shapes, different metals, some twisted, one carved from salt, one entirely blackened. In the center of the table, between their hands, lay a book, not her grandmother's, older, thicker, bound in cords of hair. The air shifted. One of the chairs creaked. Eleanor turned, not breathing. No one moved, but the book was no longer closed. Its cover now faced her, blank but wet-looking as though freshly oiled. She stepped forward. Her lantern dimmed to the faintest glow. She reached out, one shaking hand hovering over the open page. Her fingertips brushed the paper, and a voice spoke, not aloud, inside her. Choose the key that does not belong to you. She looked at the hands. 7 keys, 7 still figures. The voice repeated, choose the key that does not belong to you. Eleanor's throat tightened. The wrong key might open a wrong door, might unseal something that should stay buried. But which was wrong? Which key did not belong? She stared at the 7 shapes. One of the hands, a woman's thin with rusted silver ring, held a key that seemed newer than the others, polished, untouched by dust. It shone faintly in the lantern light. Wrong. It had not waited. It had been placed. She reached out, touched it. The moment her fingers closed around the metal, all 7 figures inhaled, a soft collective gasp, and sat up straighter, still masked, still silent, but watching. Eleanor stepped back. The book flipped shut on its own. The roots above her groaned. The chamber shook, softly, like a distant drum. And then, the stone behind the table opened, not like a door. It peeled, revealing a tunnel carved into black earth. A narrow passage lined with symbols glowing faintly blue. And, at the end of the tunnel, something breathing. Slow, deep, as if the earth had lungs. The masked figures did not follow, but one raised a hand and pointed down the tunnel, as if to say, "You chose, now follow." Eleanor stood before the tunnel as the chamber behind her fell quiet again. The masked figures sat motionless, but a memory of their movement lingered in the corners of her vision, like after-images burned into her sight. One of them had breathed. They had all breathed, but now they waited, watching. The tunnel ahead wasn't long, but it felt infinite. The air that emerged from it carried a heatless warmth, a moist exhale from something vast. The lantern's light barely penetrated the passage, bouncing faintly off the glowing blue symbols etched into the walls. They pulsed like bioluminescence, in patterns too complex to be random but too alien to understand. The key in Eleanor's hand throbbed once. Not pain, pressure, as if it were reminding her this was hers now, her price, her door. She stepped into the tunnel. The floor was soft beneath her boots, silt or packed ash. She couldn't tell. The walls were close, no wider than her shoulders, and as she moved, the symbols seemed to turn very slowly, to face her, not physically, but perceptually. They were aware. About halfway down, the air grew heavier. Her lungs didn't ache, but her limbs did, as if the tunnel knew how to slow her. Each step took effort now. Each thought felt clouded, like she was swimming through honey. The passage narrowed. The glowing symbols gave way to smooth walls. And then, it opened. She stepped out into a second chamber, much larger, circular again, but this time the ceiling arched so high she couldn't see it. The walls rippled, not visibly, but in feeling, as though the space were alive beneath its surface. And at the center of the chamber stood a door, not set in stone, not part of the wall, standing, freestanding, like it had grown from the ground up, made of material she couldn't name, dark, like shadow carved into wood. It absorbed the light, gave back nothing. No frame, no hinges, just a slab with a handle shaped like a crooked root. It hummed, not in sound, in the body, in the blood. Her hand, the one holding the key, began to rise, unbidden. The key pulled toward the door, and the door leaned, just slightly, as if meeting her halfway. She stopped a foot from it. Her chest burned from holding her breath. The key was warm now, warmer than metal should be. Behind her, the tunnel had closed. No sound, no shift, just gone. The chamber didn't feel like it had been built. It felt like it had remembered itself. A womb of stone and silence. Eleanor raised the key. The moment the metal touched the door, her ears filled with whispers. Too many to count, all layered atop one another, like voices submerged in deep water. None distinct, none human. The door trembled and opened. There was no latch, no push, no swing. It simply parted. Beyond it, blackness, not darkness. Blackness, the kind that made her skin crawl, the kind that saw. Something waited in that void. She felt it immediately. It didn't rush forward, didn't roar or speak or beckon. It watched. The air pressed against her chest. Her knees buckled slightly. Tears welled unbidden. And then she heard it, her grandmother's voice. Clear, gentle, not from the blackness. From inside her own skull. You shouldn't be here, Ellie. You weren't meant to come this far. Her fingers clutched the edge of the open door. But since you are, you need to remember. The door is not for seeing. It is not for going. It is for knowing. And once you know, there's no forgetting. The whispers in the dark grew louder, faster. A rhythm emerged. A heartbeat. The same rhythm from the stone seal in the forest. The same rhythm from the mirror, the clearing, the photograph. Eleanor stepped forward. Only 1 foot. The blackness didn't move. but something in it responded. A shape, a shifting, like smoke folding around something too large to name. Then, a flash, a vision, too fast to stop, too clear to misinterpret. A field of mirrors, broken and whispering. A faceless thing walking backward into her shadow. A garden where every flower bore her own dead face. A child, hollow-eyed, whispering her name into a dried-up well. A tower made of bones, and at its summit, a window that showed her room, right now, as it looked from the inside out. And then, Eleanor's own body, asleep in her bed, chest still, eyes open, mouth whispering. She fell backward, screaming without sound, the blackness curling at the edges of her vision. She collapsed onto the chamber floor, the door slamming shut without sound. The key still clutched in her hand, now fused to her skin, embedded, half absorbed. The whisper stopped, the silence returned, and the chamber let her go. She woke, unsure how much later, back in the parlor. The trapdoor closed, the lantern burned beside her, and outside at last, the fog was beginning to lift. But the mirror upstairs had cracked a second time, and this time, her reflection was no longer there. Eleanor didn't move at first. She simply lay on the parlor floor, one cheek pressed to the wood, the faint warmth of the lantern seeping into her back. Her ears rang with the absence of sound. Her heartbeat felt misaligned, like it wasn't hers, or like there was a second one, buried deeper inside, trying to sync with it. The mirror upstairs had cracked again. She could feel it, not just sense it. Feel it, like a vein had split in some shared body. Eventually, she stood. Her legs shook, her hands dirt-stained, the edges of her vision still fraying now and then, like the world might blink and show something else. She looked at her palm. The key had not gone. It hadn't stayed, either. Where it had been, something new now sat beneath the skin, raised hard, silver the edges, like a buried shard. Her palm ached when she moved her fingers. A reminder, a price. She didn't remember climbing the stairs, only standing before the mirror. It still sat where she'd left it, draped in thin cloth, the salt circle intact. But the cloth now billowed slightly, like breath passed behind it. No wind, no movement, just a long, slow inhale. She reached down and lifted the edge of the cloth, only the corner, and there, behind the fractured glass, her reflection was gone, not replaced, absent, no silhouette, no light, just a dim pain, as though the mirror no longer faced a room at all, but another place, far deeper, far colder, a dim hallway, a wooden floor, her floor, but the light was wrong, flickering, like the house was being remembered from somewhere else. The air behind her shifted. She dropped the cloth, turned, nothing. The house was still, but every board felt tighter, every shadow darker at the corners. Her grandmother's notebook lay on the dresser. She picked it up, fingers trembling, and flipped to the back. New writing again, this time rushed, slanted, sloppy. They know where you are now. That's what the door does. It lets them see. A house with too many eyes is no longer a house. It's a mouth, and yours is open. Eleanor shut the book. The house creaked, not as it had before, not the groaning of age, of weather or wind. It creaked like a joint bending, like something long asleep had begun to stretch. She walked quickly down the hall, past rooms that had once been familiar. The study, the spare bedroom, the bathroom with its cracked tile, an ancient mirror above the sink. That mirror, too, had changed. Its reflection was now delayed. Her movements arrived seconds after her body had passed. She didn't look again. She returned to the front door, unlocked it, opened it. Fog still clung to the porch edges, but the sky above was clearing. Pale blue, thin sunlight, filtered and wan. The kind of sky that didn't yet trust the day. She stepped outside. The garden remained wild. The ferns near the edge of the house were tall again, taller, as though overnight they had grown in ways the body wasn't meant to see. They shivered when she passed, not from wind, in recognition. And the woods beyond? Still, watching. Eleanor walked the perimeter of the house. The earth was soft beneath her feet. She made it halfway around before she saw it. The back window. Her grandmother's window. It was open, not shattered, not forced, just open, calmly, like someone had unlatched it from the inside. She froze. The curtains fluttered gently in and out. Breathing, Eleanor approached slowly, careful not to disturb the soil. There were no footprints, no drag marks, just a shadow cast across the ground from inside the room. It moved when she didn't, just slightly. She stepped up to the window and peered in. The room was empty, the bed untouched, the walls unchanged, the oil lamp still on the bedside table, unlit. But the air inside the room was moving, not drifting, pulling, like the window wasn't letting air out. It was drawing it in. Eleanor backed away. The lantern in her hand flickered once, then went out. The cold that swept over her wasn't wind. It was breath. A voice echoed behind her, close against the back of her neck. There's more than one house. She turned. Nothing, just the garden, the ferns, the woods. The notebook pulsed in her coat again. She opened it to middle this time, fingers landing on a page nearly worn smooth from use. The words were hers again, handwritten, but she hadn't written them. If you leave, it will wait. It always does. If you stay, you must feed it. Houses don't live alone. They need memory. They need mirrors. If yours breaks, it will build another. She looked back at the open window and realized something. It wasn't her house anymore. Not completely. The mirrors had begun to open, and some things, once invited, do not know how to leave. Eleanor stood still in the yard, watching the open window with her breath held deep in her chest. The wind didn't shift. The house made no sound, and yet she felt it. The gaze, not from one direction, not from behind the window, but from every side, like the air itself had eyes. The notebook trembled in her hand. She didn't know how long she stood there. Long enough for the sun to rise a little higher. Long enough for the fog to pull back toward the tree line, like it was returning home. And then, a sound from within the house. A dragging, slow, deliberate, like a chair scraping across stone, but underneath the floorboards. The groan didn't end. It only paused, then resumed, like something trying to find a comfortable position in a space too small. She stepped back toward the porch. The key embedded in her hand pulsed once. The door opened before she touched it. Inside, the hallway was longer, not dramatically so. Subtle, but she could feel it. There had been 9 floorboards between the front door and the parlor's threshold. Now there were 13. The lanterns still burned, but they changed color. Faintly, no longer warm yellow. Now faintly orange, like firelight remembered through dust. She stepped inside. The house did not welcome her. It acknowledged her. That was worse. A gust of warm air passed through the hall, brushing against her like the breath of someone who had been waiting too long. She moved toward the stairs, hand resting on the banister. It was damp. She pulled away and saw moss growing along the railing, just a thin layer, almost delicate, curling toward her skin. And above, a new door. There had never been a 3rd floor. Not in her memory, not in the blueprints she'd once seen folded in her grandmother's desk. But there was now a narrow staircase above the landing where ceiling should have been. The wood looked new, almost fresh, like the house had grown it overnight. Eleanor didn't climb. Not yet. Instead, she went to the parlor. The fireplace now held a mirror where the mantel had been, set into the stone. Cracked. 3 fractures ran across its surface, each pointing to a corner of the room. The salt circle by the trapdoor had blackened. The salt turned to soot. Whatever had been sealed below had gone quiet, but not gone. She knelt near the hearth and touched the mirror gently. It was warm, the warmth of a body. It pulsed faintly beneath her palm, and for a brief, breathless moment, it showed her something else. Another version of the parlor, identical in shape, but rearranged. Old furniture, moth-eaten, curtains drawn tight. The fire burning in the hearth, casting wild shadows across the walls. And in the mirror room's chair sat someone, or something. She couldn't see its face. Only a smile. Wide. Familiar. It looked like hers, but far too old, and it was watching her through the glass. She jerked her hand away. The image vanished. Only her fractured reflection remained, mouth slightly parted in confusion or dread. She backed away from the hearth. The notebook fell open at her side. This time the ink had bled through several pages, but one sentence stood out, carved deeper than the rest. The house is no longer rooted in place. It has begun to remember its other selves. She shut the book, then looked up the staircase to the new door. It hadn't been there an hour ago. Now it waited open, just slightly ajar, like a tongue pressed the back of a tooth. She climbed. The stairs didn't creak. They breathed. With every step, the walls leaned in. Pictures she didn't recognize lined them, photos of the house, but in stages she had never seen. One showed it overgrown in vines. Another boarded up. One picture was burned at the edges, with the date 1903 written in the corner in pencil. And then, one photo showed her, asleep in the chair downstairs. The same chair she had passed minutes ago. Same blanket. Same tilted head. Same expression. She touched the frame. It was warm like the mirror. The door at the top of the stairs groaned, opened wider. She reached the landing. A single hallway, longer than it should have been, lined with doors. None of them hers. Some made of wood, some of bone, some breathing faintly like gills. The first door she passed whispered as she approached. The second shivered. The third was open, and inside, a perfect replica of her bedroom, but wrong. The walls pulsed slightly. The bed was too long. The mirror on the dresser was shattered in a spiral, like something had screamed into it. She turned back into the hallway. Each door was a memory, or a version, or a wound. Some stood silent. Others leaned inward, like they want to be opened. One door, midway down, bore her name, Eleanor, etched in the child's handwriting. She reached for it, but behind her, another door swung open with a snap. A long, dark corridor beyond it, and the sound of a music box playing from the end. The same tune that had played in the forest. A child's song, warped, and from that darkness, her voice again. Small, tired. I've been here a long time. Eleanor didn't move. The hallway breathed, and behind every door, something began to stir, as if the house had realized she was in its newest room, and it was hungry to show her more. The hallway whispered like dry leaves underfoot, though Eleanor's steps made no sound. The music box tune, off-key, choked with time, continued to play from the far end of the corridor. The longer it played, the younger her own voice became, echoing out from the dark. I waited for you. I tried not to forget. Each word layered itself over the next, like water filling a cracked glass, almost overflowing. Some syllables slurred into each other. Others were too crisp, too deliberate, as if rehearsed, as if repeated for years, waiting for the right ears. The door labeled Eleanor remained shut behind her, still as a grave. She approached the open room at the end of the hallway. Inside, a child bedroom. Not hers, not exactly, but close. Familiar colors, familiar dolls, familiar scuffs in the floorboard beneath the bed, and sitting on the edge of the mattress, legs swinging just barely above the floor, was a little girl. She wore Eleanor's face, a younger version, 7, maybe 8, pale knees, mud on her dress, hair unbrushed, hanging in limp ropes past her chin. The girl didn't look up, but she spoke again, still in Eleanor's voice. I didn't mean to leave, but I had to hide. Eleanor stepped into the room. The walls didn't blink, but they wanted to. She could feel them pressing in, as if the room was taking shallow breaths. The floor creaked faintly with other footsteps, ones that didn't match her rhythm. The girl lifted her head, eyes wide, all black, like 2 holes had been punched into a paper mask. She smiled. You forgot me. No, Eleanor whispered, voice catching in her throat. You did. I counted the days. The music box wound down. Slower, lower. You locked the door and threw away the key. But you can't throw away me. I'm still here. Eleanor stepped closer. The girl mirrored her, not like a reflection, like a puppet, synchronized, deliberate. When Eleanor raised her right hand, the girl did too. When she tilted her head, so did the child, but the eyes didn't match. They stared straight through her, fixed, wide, trembling, not the gaze of a memory, the gaze of something trapped. They made me sleep, the girl said softly. They made me dream the wrong things. I dreamed I was a house full of mirrors, and the mirrors were eyes, and the eyes wouldn't close. Eleanor's fingers brushed the edge of the bed, and immediately the floor shifted. The room grew smaller. Physically, the corners folded inward, warping like paper set in flame. The air tightened, pressed behind her eyes. Her vision blurred the edges, like the world was breathing too fast for her to keep up. The girl leaned forward. I'm not the only one, she whispered. The floor opened, not fell, not collapsed, but peeled back like rotten fruit, revealing a dark well beneath the mattress, ringed with carved symbols Eleanor had seen in the stone book. From below, a chorus of voices rose. Some cried, some screamed, one whispered. You let the mirror crack too deep. Eleanor stumbled back. The room no longer held its shape. The walls bent in unnatural angles. The ceiling lowered. The air was wet now, slick with condensation or sweat or memory. The girl stood. She was taller now, her limbs elongated but uneven, one arm too long, one leg too short, hair thickening, skin pale and cracking like old porcelain. She smiled again, too wide. They remember you too. The bed frame split down the middle, revealing a staircase that descended into the dark, lit only by slivers of mirror shards suspended in the air, gently spinning. The girl began to walk backward down the stairs. Come see what you built. Eleanor hesitated. The house behind her groaned. The other doors had begun to open one by one. From inside them, things began to crawl. Not quickly, just deliberately, as if summoned by her breath. She followed the girl, step by step, down into the underroom. It was not a basement. It was not a cellar. It was a vault of memory. And the deeper she went, the more the walls began to show her. Scenes, moments, each set into a circular frame made of bone and silver. Her grandmother, kneeling before the fireplace, drawing salt lines. A much younger Eleanor, staring at the forest from her window, one hand pressed to the glass, something standing behind her in reflection, a version of herself asleep in the field of ferns, eyes open, mouth full of soil. Each image shimmered briefly, then burned away, replaced by another. The stairs ended. The girl had vanished, and in her place stood a door, different from the others, this one made of light and reflection. Like dozens of mirrors had been melted together and shaped into a slab. Eleanor's embedded key burned in her hand again. The door opened itself. No sound, just a rush of cold air, like opening a tomb. Inside, a room filled with mirrors, but none showed her. Each one showed a different house, different times, some on fire, some sunken into earth, one floating in black water. Each mirror had a name etched into the corner in a hand she couldn't recognize. All but one. The largest mirror bore no name, only a single phrase carved across the top. The house that remembers. And inside it, Eleanor saw herself, standing before the mirror, watching, alone, but smiling. And behind her reflection, through the mirror glass, every door opened at once. The reflection didn't blink. Not once. It stood, Eleanor, yes, but more refined, sharper around the edges. The lines of her jaw more symmetrical, the hair smoother, the posture unbending. Still wearing the same coat, the same boots, the same embedded key in her hand, but somehow untouched, as if that version of her had walked this entire path without fear, without hesitation. And behind that reflection, within the mirror's frame, the hallway unfurled, expanding in all directions, door after door after door, each swinging inward with a slow, shuddering creak. No wind moved them, no hand touched them. They opened because she was watching, because the mirror wanted to be seen. Eleanor took a step toward the glass. It did not ripple. It did not resist. It parted, as though it had only ever been a doorway made of memory. She passed through, and the sound that followed her was not a whoosh, not a crack, but a click, like a lock turning, like something behind her had sealed shut. The house she entered was identical, but brighter, not warmer, just clearer. Every wall perfectly straight, every lantern burning steady. The floorboards had no creak to them. There was no dust, no flaws. The perfection made her stomach churn. Perfection meant something was wrong. The version of herself was waiting. She stood at the foot of the staircase, hands folded, smiling, that same not quite human smile. And this time her mouth moved. "I'm so glad you made it." Her voice was a near-perfect echo, almost indiscernible, but hollow, like it had been emptied of meaning long ago and only now remembered how to shape vowels again. Eleanor said nothing. She looked around. This house didn't breathe like the others. It didn't grow. It observed. Each object, each window pane, each doorknob seemed placed with intention, not lived in, arranged, like a room preserved inside a snow globe. The reflection Eleanor gestured gently. "Come see. It's ready now." Eleanor followed her to the parlor. No mirror above the fireplace this time, but every wall was covered in framed photographs. Hundreds of them. Each one showed a different version of the house. Each one showed her, in different positions, different states. In some, she was asleep. In some, she was screaming. In one, she stood at a window with black eyes and a small smile, mouth just beginning to open. And in another, she was gone entirely. Only the room remained. "These are the rooms the house built for you," the reflection said, "because you remembered too much." She pointed toward the farthest wall, where one frame hung crookedly. The glass was cracked. The photo inside was blank, just empty white space. "This one is waiting." "For what?" Eleanor asked quietly. "For what comes after." The notebook in her pocket pulsed. She pulled it out. It flipped on its own, pages tearing past her fingers until it landed on a blank spread. And then ink began to bleed upward from the bottom. A list, each item handwritten in a different style, different pressure. Some cursive, some blocky, some almost childish. Names, all of them Eleanor. Eleanor Gray, Eleanor G, E.G., Laura Nye, Ellen Rain, Elrin. On and on it went, looping and repeating until the names became symbols, until the letters curled in on themselves, backward, no longer readable, until there were no letters left, only marks. The reflection turned her head. Her smile widened. The house remembers you in every language. A sound began behind the walls. A hum, low, rhythmic, mechanical but organic, like the turning of a grate wheel hidden behind brick. "What is this place?" Eleanor whispered. "The house behind the mirrors, the one that waits beneath all the others. The original." The reflection walked to a panel on the wall and pressed it gently. The wall rotated, revealing another mirror. This one was broken into 9 sections, each shard floating just apart from the others, held in a frame of rusted silver. "You can choose one," the reflection said. "And what happens then?" "Then you return." "Return to where?" The reflection tilted her head. "To whichever version remembers you best." The air turned colder, and the mirrors began to glow. Each shard showed a different scene. A forest overrun with ash and root. A city street soaked in red light. A hospital hallway with no end. A classroom with no windows. A bedroom, candlelit, with her grandmother standing at the foot of the bed, weeping. One shard showed her own face, but different, older, forgotten. Another showed a version of her watching herself sleep. And the final one, black, just black, no movement, but it pulsed faintly, the same way the door had. The reflection stepped back. One of them will become you, and the rest will keep remembering. Eleanor stared at the shards. All versions, all real, all waiting. She raised her hand and touched the one that showed her grandmother. The glass was cold, colder than anything she had felt since arriving. The reflection nodded, then go back. But know this. She leaned forward, close enough that her breath fogged the glass between them. Once the house remembers you, it never stops. The mirror flashed. The notebook burst into flame in her hand. She screamed. Light filled the room, and she fell. Eleanor hit the floor hard, but it was soft. Not grass, not wood. Sheets. She gasped and sat up, clutching her burned hand. But there was no pain now, no smoke, no ash, just silence, and the unmistakable texture of her own bedspread beneath her. The house was hers again, or looked that way. The ceiling overhead bore the same old crack. She remembered tracing with her eyes when she couldn't sleep as a child. The lantern on the bedside table was unlit, but still smelled faintly of oil. The dresser, the window, her boots tucked in the corner. All of it right. Too right. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream, some hallucination, some fever memory stitched together by grief and exhaustion. The forest, the mirror, the cracked reflection, the endless stairs, the girl with her face, the house made of doors. But then she saw her hand. The key was still there, embedded in the palm. Not metal now. Bone white, ridged like antler. A scar was shaped. Not just a mark, but a place in her. She stood slowly. The floor creaked beneath her. Familiar, ordinary. But underneath that, faintly, like a song heard through water, something shifted. She opened the bedroom door. The hallway stretched before her, normal in every way. But the mirror was gone, the one she had covered the first night. Only a square of faded wallpaper remained, unbroken. She walked to the parlor. The fireplace was cold, the hearth unswept, the lanterns unlit, and yet something about the air had changed. She knelt beside the trapdoor, still there, still closed, but no longer sealed in soot or salt, just quiet, just waiting. She didn't open it. Instead, she went outside. The garden had grown again, but naturally now. Wild ferns, early flowers, no twisting vines that moved when her back was turned. Just wind, real wind, and sky, clear, pale blue, with no fog pressing against the trees. The forest was still. The birds had returned. She stood on the porch for a long time. The sun rose higher. She breathed. And then, from behind her, a creak, just one, from upstairs, her grandmother's room. Not loud, not urgent, just deliberate. Eleanor turned slowly, climbed the steps. At the top of the stairs, the hallway was just as she remembered it. Aged wallpaper, uneven floorboards, the faint scent of lavender oil and something older. She stood before her grandmother's door. It was open, just an inch, and inside music, faint, crackling, a music box tune, slower now, almost mournful, almost kind. She pushed the door, opened the rest of the way. The room was bathed in soft light from the window, empty, except the mirror was backed, above the old vanity, uncracked. Oh, she stepped toward it. Her reflection stared back. No distortion, no delay, no black eyes or wide smile. Just her, tired, pale, real. But as she leaned in, only inches from glass, her reflection lifted a hand and pressed it to the inside of the mirror. A gesture Eleanor had not made, and in the reflection, just behind her, the hallway stretched longer than it should. The shadows pulled deep in the walls could allow, and doors began to appear. One by one, she turned. The real hallway was unchanged, but when she turned back, her reflection was smiling, slow, patient. The key in her palm burned cold, and the mirror began to fog. She stepped away, backed into the hallway, closed the door behind her. The music box fell silent. She went downstairs. She didn't leave the house. Not that day. Not the next. Sometimes, she would sit on the porch with a book she never read and listen to the wind combing through the trees. Sometimes, she would walk the rooms and count the floorboards, just to be sure. Sometimes, she would hear something upstairs, but she wouldn't go check. And at night, before she went to sleep, she would look in the mirror. Just once. Just enough to make sure it still showed her. So far it always had. But deep in the walls, behind the plaster, behind the stone, behind the mirrors, the house remembered. It waited. And one day, she would dream the wrong dream again and wake up in one of the other rooms, one of the ones that still had her name on the door. And when that day came, the house would smile and open the door